Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads. We have tried to answer a question but to no avail. We have asked and asked time and time again, but there is a strong suspicion that this question would never be answered correctly. For some people, certain games might be tricky and for others, less. The question is, which is the most complex game of chess ever played? We can, with some degree of certainty, make the following statement. Do not be fooled by attempting to get this answer on the web. All the searches you will run, will lead you to the same outcome. For example, the game of 1953 between Reshevsky and Keres is one, another, is claimed to be the 1994 game between Kasparov and Topalov, and a third one involved again Topalov back in 2005, when he assumed the other side of the board against Vishy Anand. How complex can any of these human encounters be when you have the top chess engine championship games, and when these engines can look at millions of lines using depths of 80 plus per move? We can guarantee this. If you pick out any top chess engine game, from any division, and from any season, and then compare this to that of any human encounter, you will then begin to understand those human games begin to become somewhat irrelevant. So this is what we are going to do today. We have looked at thousands of games, and though with no degree of certainty we can pinpoint one specific encounter, this is the game which we believe to have been the most complex, or at least one of the most complex games ever played. Before any attempt to delve into any game, we need first to understand the definition of a complex game. It appears when a game involves various tactics and strategies, where the tactical possibilities are large, and the strategy itself diverges into a relatively lengthy sequence of moves to include king safety, pawn and piece structure, and last but not least, the control of certain key squares. In short, there is no easy way to define this term, but after having searched and searched, the game we have today has to stand out, and can easily make the top 3 on any chart. In order to experience it, we need to go back to 2018. It is a top chess engine championship game between Houdini and Stockfish. To be more precise, we need to go back to season 11, and we additionally need to look at the Premier League of round 23. It was game 92 of a total of 336 games played in this league. If you know nothing about this game, and this is the likely event you have not watched it elsewhere, we will try not to give anything away. You can always cheat by fast forwarding to the end, but this is going to be defeating the object of this video. Using our normal chessboard, and adding all the necessary details pertaining to this game, we can now make a start. One little detail we have not added to this game just yet, is the book used and the number of moves. So to get this out in the open, the engines used a predetermined book of 8 moves. We are going to start from the beginning to see where these come from, and commence from that point on. Houdini 6.03 started up with the English. Stockfish in turn uses this move, and what we got to see here, was this opening on the kingside. Stockfish developed the kingside knight to the usual square you would expect to see the knight come. Houdini in turn uses the queenside knight to come into the game. Stockfish here uses this bishop entry into the 5th, and you can already smell it. This game from the outset looks hot, way before the end of book. Houdini went for this bishop move, the knight here is also introduced, and the book ends with this push to e3, castles, knight e2, rook e8, castles, d6, d4, and of course this bishop retreat to b6. Does anyone know what we are looking at? We are good to say it's the closed English, but this is as far as we are willing to stick our necks out. Did you know that many engine games from this championship are using many books that have been played by humans across the various tournaments? In addition to this, there is something else we would like to disclose. For those who are following engine games, normally the book used favors one side or the other, and rarely a book is balanced. This is evident in at least the last 2 seasons we saw, but going back to earlier seasons, just like this one, the books usually do not favor any side. The evaluations used are not important, but more than often, they provide a clearer picture of what you can expect. In this game, we are not going to reveal what the engines think. Houdini 6 at the time was a top-notch engine, but this is no longer the case. Since it was abandoned, and since Stockfish underwent multiple upgrades, we all know how powerful Stockfish really is. At the time of the game, Stockfish was competing on version 9. For those who want to know, Stockfish 100218 is an upgrade brought out on the 10th of February 2018. Okay, now that we have this important detail out of the way, let's get on with the game. Houdini has plenty of options. The engine can introduce this move to h3 to deny the bishop on c8 access into g4. Houdini can attack the knight on c6 with a straight d5. The engine can trade the bishop for the knight on c6, which is in fact a very unlikely move, but also if you look deeper, the knight on c3 can jump into the rim to attack the bishop. Another response you may consider is this push to e4, but Houdini does not look at any of these moves, or does see them but does not consider them to carry any significant weight. So what the engine did was to go it extremely prophylactically. It opted for this push on the queen side, a move to possibly stop the knight's access into b4. And of course, the biggest reason for Houdini going for this move is to try and get b4 in, and then of course try and tickle this knight on c6, and this is should Stockfish allow it. It wasn't to be, and we know this because the mighty Stockfish launched this type of response, cutting out any chance of allowing Houdini a move like b4. Actually, a deeper move appears to be this move into b3, a move that supports the pawn on c4, but as we know, just like with any other chess game, it has to be one move at a time. Mark my words, what you see here is the calm before the storm. Stockfish approached the game by choosing to go for this bishop move, and though this is not a very clear and transparent response, we do believe this move was precautionary. It covers nicely the knight on c6, and at the same time, it frees up the back rank, leaving the queen and rooks to communicate. Furthermore, there is some tension being built in the center, and before you know it, we will get to see an explosion. Houdini, just like Stockfish, are engines that understand complex strategies. If either engine picks up or detects an error, however tiny this might be, they will go for it. Houdini saw fit to get bishop number 2 into the diagonal, and though this is not rare, you do not get to see any engines sticking their bishops in both diagonals. Any idea what side looks more threatening with this position? We could not tell you, but hopefully, in a few moves we might. And here is where Stockfish makes a move. The engine captures in the center, and the party is about to get started. Do you take this pawn on d4 is question 1, and question 2 would be to answer if you take, and how. Can we actually try and figure this one out? First, we need to determine if Houdini has just handed over a pawn, or is there something deeper to consider. Let's finally analyze. If you take with the knight, the next response is a bit on the forcing side. Take the knight, capture with the pawn, and in fact the coast is clear. Stockfish can in fact try this queen repositioning, with ideas of trying to get to the opposing queen. Queen c8 does a bit more than getting ready for an assault. It stops this pawn on b7 from being taken. Queen d2 does not stop bishop g4, but Stockfish may not be looking at this square. What if the engine tried this move instead? If the bishops come off, this pawn on b7 can no longer be threatened by any bishop, but how does any engine make progress? How powerful would this rook repositioning be? The correct answer would be, not powerful at all, or better said, rook e1 is a blunder. Can you figure out why? Once the knight finds this very attractive outpost, we are already moving into a checkmate territory. Going after the knight in this way is one move too late, because Stockfish would easily be able to pick up this pawn, and Houdini would be powerless to act. If you take the bishop, you should be looking at a mate soon. Take with a check, move the king into f1, and when this move appears, the only response you have is to squeeze in the queen to block the check. Can you see or work out the mate? One is to jump the knight here, and after the king is ejected to the second, this is what you are looking to achieve, and is game over. There is another way too. It's here when the queen blocks the check. Take on f3 with a check, and when the queen steps in to block the check, all you are managing is to get checkmated, and this is how. This is one line of thousands anyone can try. So now that we are able to work out the ins and outs of a hypothetical rook move into e1, in order not to allow the knight to gain access into g4, the correct way to go about is via this push into f3. If this move takes place, initiate this hypothetical advancement, and should you back off the knight with ideas of trying to get to her with knight f4, what would you think this push on the king side does? g4, and probably the only move, and this one is another brain breaker. How do you stop the queen from getting trapped? Because knight f4 will get you there. There is one way and one way only to escape, but can you spot it? It's here via this knight takes on g4. Go knight f4 and this queen on h3 cannot be wasted. Take with a check. Take, and take. And though this position has somewhat simplified, it is by no means decisive. How would Stockfish proceed? It has to be via this rook lift, right into the third. Rook f2, c6 to stop the knight from gaining access into d5, and now this king response, and though this position looks to be on the equal side of things, there might be a possibility that Houdini stands better. Not by much, but better is better, even though this advantage might be tiny. If we return to this position, would it be better to remove the knight with the pawn? This definitely is not looking better. And this is why. Take with a check, and should the king find the corner, not only this knight is going to come flying off, but because of the mate on g2 in 1, this queen on d2 would need to be sacrificed, just to keep the game going that bit longer. Coming back by one single move, right after this queen check, there is this alternate scenario. What if you went for this knight move, and as soon as the pawn eliminates him, you can try rook e1, or even queen f4. Jump into this at your own time to check how far you can get with these two specific lines. If we come back to this position, and we must, in order to clear any confusion, after bishop h3, with the attempt to get the bishops to go, what if you ignored it and opted for this rook repositioning? If you take, and now remove the rook, when the queen arrests this rook, now you can go and get rid of the bishop. The difference here is that the queen is no longer able for now to deliver any checks without her being taken off the board. Would this position look equal? Since the most important and critical squares are inaccessible by both sides, and since one side has exactly the same pieces and points as the other, this is what you might want to call a typical drawish situation. And maybe for this very reason, we had not seen such moves unfold. Coming back one more time. Would you believe this is only move 11? You can imagine how complex this game appears to be, and there is a myriad of variations in existence. This brings us to another very important point. We are not going to skim on moves, so please bear with us. We are going to stay longer today, and this by far is going to be the longest video from all 42 videos we produced. When this pawn took in the center, we looked at the situation when the knight takes. This game went off a tangent, but not much changes as a result. Houdini took with the pawn, and again, if you think things have simplified, you may want to think again. These positions would arise when both sides castle on the same side, but what is so menacing about the position you see here are these two nasty looking bishops on b2 and b6, respectively. There is no more dangerous squares to have them on, and though this bishop on b2 just looks less threatening, do not be fooled. He is as menacing. What we have covered so far with our last line of play bears some degree of similarity to how this game was going to progress. Just like before, this is what Stockfish played, and the rationale is to get the bishop to find h3. Houdini, A top engine at the time calculated what Stockfish wanted to do and simply stopped the bishop's access into h3 by jumping the knight right into this outpost on f4. The knight on f4 does far more than just prevent the access into h3. He additionally allows the queen on d1 extra space, and furthermore, adds pressure on the knight on c6 by wanting to go after him. Though Stockfish's bishop can no longer reach h3, Stockfish didn't really mind. The engine used both the knight and queen to launch after the queen in this way. Before we explain what is going on with this bishop attack in more detail, if we place this bishop back, why couldn't Stockfish get rid of this pawn on d4? If you get rid of him, how would you do it? If you take with the bishop, this would be equal to a full-blown blunder because as soon as the knight on c6 comes off, would you be able to work this one out? It's another complex situation and maybe a bit too deep for us humans to comprehend. If you take the knight, take the bishop first, take the bishop with the queen, and once this bishop on c3 comes off too, at best you can try this attack. This appears to not be a real and credible attack because not only the bishop can escape to safety, but another resource could and would come to his rescue. Queen d4 for example is somewhat decisive and there is a limited way Stockfish can react. If the bishop comes off to the knight, Stockfish would have one pawn more, but when you down by a full knight, using this position as you see it, not even Stockfish would be able to escape punishment. Coming back to this position, there might be another way. You can take on f2 with a check, and when the rook captures the bishop, now you can go and capture the bishop on c6. The question is how? You got to use the pawn, and this is where we are going to stop with this line. Coming back to the game as it happened, with Stockfish here chasing after the queen, where was the queen to seek safety? One idea might be to wanting to get the knight from c3 to back off into e2, but Houdini did not like this restrictive move. What the engine did, was to lift the queen to the second. And here is where a complex situation gets even more complex. Yes, you guessed it right, if you did. Stockfish went on to take this pawn from d4, and having used the knight, how on earth do you make progress? Coming back to this move for one more time, this was the right moment to jump the knight into d5. Why do you think we identified this game specifically as being one of the most difficult ones to comprehend? It's because of the infinite possibilities and because there is so much going on at any one time. We have seen with the slightest of deviation, one engine will gain advantage to the detriment of the other. As you see it here, this knight jump into d5 adds more intricacy to the game. The knight on d4 is now fully exposed, the knight on f6 is under pressure, the bishop on b6 is additionally under threat, and what you see unfold here right in front of your very eyes, can only be witnessed in engine games, nowhere else. Stockfish appeared to have no problem in how to deal with this worry. The engine first took the knight from d5, and the big and deeper question to ask is to try and figure out how Houdini reacts. Do you take the knight from d5, and if so, how? Or, do you take this knight off from d4? Possibly there are other moves to consider too. And here is where we are going to try them all. Can you take the knight on d5 with the bishop? Sure you can, but are there consequences? The right move to respond with, would be to take this pawn on b3, and should you now reposition the queen here, with the mate threat on g7, and of course the knight in danger, the only solution has to be to retreat the knight to where he came from. Rook e1 for example, can easily lead to the bishop coming under fire, and if you take, and take, how strong would this attack on the queen be? It would not, and let's see why. Queen f8, which is a prerequisite to keep Stockfish from getting mated when the knight on d4 moves out, and even here this is no easy position to look at. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different options. We are not gonna go through the lot, but think of something like h3, queen d3, a bishop retreat from d5. We can try only one though if that makes you happy. Let's go for this bishop retreat. Rook e8 activating the rook, and now h3, and when you retreat this bishop 2 to this outpost, what on earth is the best move to go for? As things stand, Stockfish appears to be stronger because of this critical outpost on e2. You cannot afford to relinquish control because this knight on d4 could not wait to come in with a fork to pick up the queen. Coming back to the game, and this is move 16 for anyone who counts, we hypothesized what could take place if this knight takes the pawn on b3. Stockfish, however, had a different calculative process. It used all the cores and all the tons of memory it was given to sneak in a top-notch move. With everything you see going on here, this was the move the engine went for. And even here we humans might not be able to figure out what is going on, other than the queen being attacked. The absolute human move to roll out would be to go for this queen move to c3. Bishop to the rim, and now rook d1 to go after the knight, and the only way to try and hold on to this knight is via this pawn push. If you go after the bishop, there is an extremely tricky situation unfolding and is very easily missable, or missed if you like. Just try this rook move to the back rank, or even, rather than this, we can go for this bishop retreat. Rook e1, queen d8, and the trick here would be to wait to see if the rook on d2 is captured. If he is, when the knight takes the rook, this is how easy you would drop your queen. Because these are engines and are not likely to be tricked that easily, this is the expected move to see. Queen e8, bishop e6, and something like h6 are also feasible options. If h6, take the knight, take the rook of course, and now grab the bishop, and at best you can try this nifty check. King to the edge of the board can lead to this pawn to fall, and when the rook retaliates, bishop d5 to tie everything up. This position is as complex as they come. If you take on b3, you automatically run into trouble, and as soon as this pawn advances to the fifth, bishop takes c5, is going to drop the rook, but how would Houdini react if the engine comes up with this attack on the queen? This would be a dream position to have for any engine, but can you figure? This is the right move to go for. If you get rid of yet another pawn in this way, you will pay dearly with a checkmate. Queen takes on the seventh, will get you in with a mate in just a few moves unless Stockfish finds all the best moves. If for example you try this very foolish takes on the rim, rest assured, that mate has now accelerated. When this check materializes, king h7, and now this brand new knight check, and this knight has to go. If you don't drop the queen to the knight, and go for this king move, this is how you get done and is game over. All this was allowed to happen when the rook attacked the queen on c1. If we come back to this move, move 21, we saw what h6 does. Would bishop c6 be any better? Very unlikely, because when the knight is eliminated, take the rook, and when the bishop goes home too, your best bit would be to launch this check. King f8 is going to drop the knight for the bishop, but also when this pawn falls too, Houdini would be all over Stockfish. Not only a rook check from e8 is imminent, but so many other things can happen. We need to come back to this move in the game because once again, we saw something else unfold. This is chess engine territory only. Houdini 6.03 is a great engine, and if only Rob Houdit didn't stop, this engine would still be as strong as ever. Unfortunately, the engine has left the competitive scene since 2017. And for those who wish to know, in Season 17, Houdini 6.03 ended up 9 out of 10, before Scorpion, and simply unable to compete against the likes of Fire, Komodo, Ethereal, Alistein and the like. Coming back to the game, this is where Houdini places the queen, and what a strange response this was. Is it prudent to get rid of the bishop? Well, if you do, have you noted this nasty fork on e7? So for this very reason, the rook was powerless to remove the bishop because e7 is guarded by the rook. If you relinquish control of the file while the queen and king are positioned on c8 and g8 respectively, then you know what is bound to happen. For this very reason, Houdini got rid of the bishop first, the knight is then captured, and trust Houdini to find an excellent resource. Can you see it? It was this queen repositioning right into c3, seeking to go for that golden mate in 1. Stockfish has two possible answers to this worry. 1. Is this push to f6 in? d2 is to get the queen closer to g7. f6 for example was the first option Stockfish looked at, but as time passed, the engine calculated deeper and in the end opted for this latter approach. Rook e1 led to this rook to get activated, and with Houdini taking and Stockfish capturing, Houdini gets the king to find f1. We know it's getting ready to attack the bishop in order to trap the rook. The top three responses to follow from many are knight e5, queen e7 and rook e8. If knight e5 for example, what happens if you attack the bishop? In short, the bishop just vanishes unless you grab hold of the bishop on b2 and let the rook go. Coming back, for this very reason, which is not difficult to see, Stockfish retreated the rook all the way back home. This move on the queen side appears, and with now creating this opening just in case, Houdini goes on to attack the bishop. Stockfish was taking none of it. It used the rook to check the king. The king pulls back to where he stood earlier, and with the bishop backing off, we hope to go much faster with fewer pieces and as the board clears up. Bishop c1, releasing the mate threat on g7, led to the rook to return to e2, and this very move can be questionable. Houdini loved this move because it came up with the blockade and in a way tries to lock in the rook. What do you make of this Houdini response? It looks very powerful, but as soon as Stockfish came up with this superb answer to the problem, the engine is planning to have a go at the queen. King f1 for example, and this queen is nearly trapped, is she not? With queen e1 being her only answer, queen e7, and bishop takes, and what you see is another type of dead end for both engines. Coming back, we saw the same moves unfold but in a different order. Houdini went on to get rid of the pawn, there comes the queen into the game, and with rook c1, this is how Stockfish answers. The pawn on the rim is not safe, but it is not thought the pawn is wanted right now. Rook d1, and check out how crazy Stockfish's follow-up response looks. It was this attack on the rook using not only the knight as backup but the rook too. Rook d2 led to the rook to come off, the rook additionally drops, and with this pawn also biting the dust, Houdini calculated it was the right time to get rid of this pawn. The double attack on the knight called for this type of repositioning. Houdini in turn goes after the bishop in this way, but was this something entirely unnecessary? This pawn left the scene, and not bishop c3 as one would expect, but boom, Houdini used the queen to get rid of this pawn from the 7th. Knight c7, running for his life, led to the bishop to back off and closer to his king. This knight repositioning is now enacted. And what Stockfish wants to do is to get the knight to find this outpost on f6. Queen d4, led to this queen move. Queen e4 is now materialized, and with Stockfish calculating best to block everything in this way, you may wonder why the queen had not eliminated this pawn from h3. Well, do this and look what follows when the queen gets attacked in this way. The queen here would need to go, and that would be the greed of wanting to take a pawn so poisoned, that you would simply lose the game. Houdini went for this advancement on the king side, but it was Stockfish the engine that decides to accelerate things. The queens came off first. And actually that was it. The game ended in a dead draw, and what a game this has been. We tried to cover the most extensive lines, but we only touched the surface. Whether this game has been the most complex game we ever saw is largely questionable, because with millions of chess engine games on record, it is impossible to scan them all beforehand. We beg your pardon, we seem to be very keen to finish this game off. The game in fact did not end here, but there are a few moves left. King f8 resulted to the bishop move. Stockfish in turn lays his eyes by using the bishop to go after the pawn. Houdini returns the bishop to cover for the pawn, and with g6 and f3, Stockfish finds the right time to jump the knight into the 7th. King f2 and bishop d1 led to the knight to come under fire, but with Stockfish repositioning the knight to this square, this bishop on d3 cannot allow to depart because Houdini will be dropping a pawn. For this very reason, Houdini returns the bishop to the first. Stockfish jumps again the knight into this outpost, attacking the bishop, but to no avail. This bishop simply returned to safety, and with the king now coming forwards, the game ended with the last move being this bishop attack on the pawn, a pawn that easily can be saved. We have no idea how we nearly missed these last few moves, but in the end we got them in. We could have analyzed these last few moves, but since they were straightforward, a decision was made to just go through them and nothing else. We appear to have missed out a line that we promised to cover earlier, and we apologize for not getting this one in. In order to see it, we need to come back to this position in the game. It's here when the knight captures this pawn on d4. We looked at knight d5, knight takes, and the game went on as we saw it. What would happen if Houdini captures this knight with the pawn? With the knight being exposed by being attacked by two pieces and with the knight covered only by the bishop, is there any way out for the knight to escape? This check is what you need, and when the king finds the very edge, take the knight, takes with the queen, bring in the queen to challenge the queen, trade the queens in, and we know, should you get this rook in to challenge the opposing rook, this very move is going to backfire. How? It's via this takes on f2. Rook f1, rook e2, bishop c3 to get him out of trouble, back off the bishop to g6, and maybe something like this move on the queen side. Rook c2, rook c1, bishop b6, and not only the position simplifies, but with Stockfish's two-pawn surplus, the engine would be cruising to victory. The last line we would like to see to complete this game is here on move 16 right after the knight captures the knight on d5. What if you were to eliminate the knight using the knight from f4, just like Houdini did it? Rather than attack the queen with rook e2, we touched upon a very similar move. Should the knight remove this pawn, not queen c3, but this queen exit and right into g5, and if you challenge the bishop in this way, take the bishop too, and this one is going to hurt. What do you make of this knight check from f6? King to the corner, is going to get this rook to come off, and as soon as the queen is forced to capture, this bishop also drops, and all you have right now is to try this knight check. Once the king finds the corner, queen e6, trade in the queens, and after this rook repositioning, cover in this way, but when this pawn is arrested, take, and this now is child's play. Though another line is very clear in our heads, we are not 100% certain we covered it. If we return to this position, have we looked at removing the knight with the bishop? If we do this, should both bishops come off, take the knight, arrest the knight with the queen, and if you try this move on the king side, challenge the rook in this way, take the rook too, and is all about this move challenging the queen. Should the queens also depart, how strong would you feel about this rook lift to the 7th? c5, rook takes, a4, bishop d5, bishop e6, and as soon as these two bishops additionally go home, take on the rim, capture of course, and this is the move you are looking to get in. Take on c4, take on d6, get the king involved, and this one now does look very equal. One last variation, and we promised this one to be the last, is here, and let's promptly go to it. Do you remember this position? It's on move 20 when the knight is attacked. We looked at bishop takes with a check. What would happen if the king hits the edge of the board? It's all about this incoming knight check. Move the king back into g1, try again knight g4, and should the king return to the very edge again, return the knight to f2 with a check, and when the king returns to g1, what do you make of this brand new knight check from the first? Removing the bishop is not an option because you will get checkmated when the rook comes off, and alternatively, if you go for yet another king walk to the edge, can you see it? Take the rook with a check, and only when the queen eliminates this rook, now you can get in this nifty knight check. We know king g1 drops the queen, but what if you went on and gotten rid of this knight right here and right now? As soon as the queen drops, the only move you have here is in fact forced. It's this knight jump into the second to prevent the taking on g3. This position is actually hopeless for Houdini. Go for this queen response, and this knight needs to flee. If you park him here on the first, take the knight, and how would you capture? It would have to be with the king. As soon as you run along with this brand new check, this bishop on b2 is up next. If you try king h1 once again, as soon as the other rook comes into the game, rook f1 is actually hopeless. When you attack the rook and the bishop, only then you will notice the power of the queen. King g1 to try and hold onto the rook does nothing for the bishop, and he too would need to go. And this was it, everyone. We have stretched this game to limits we have not gone earlier, and this, if you like, marks our 200 subscribers to the channel. Next week, we are going to introduce something we have not done before, and we would always appreciate any feedback you would like to share. In the meantime, though this game ended with each engine sharing the point between them, we strongly believe this game stood out for the reasons we have seen. With each engine making every single move count, it was a combination between taking on an aggressive versus defensive approach. At times Stockfish pushed when Houdini stepped back, and at times, it was Houdini the engine that went it offensively. In the end, and with both engines considering king safety first, neither engine was able to get there in the end. And this is what you call a perfect type of game. But remember, with every game ending in a draw, we have seen more often a perfect game than an imperfect one. As soon as the 8-move book was complete, this type of closed English being contested, got hot very fast, both engines dove in, each tried to take control of the center, neither succeeded in the end, but the game did not die down at the later stages, with probably the exception in the ending where the game was finally adjudicated as a draw. There have been many moments due to the game's complex nature, but engines are creatures of habit. Their calculative abilities are second to none. Both Houdini 6.03 and Stockfish 9 had been able to see 000 figures all along, which also means they were able to maintain the score at that level, sharing the point between them. And this was game 92. It was long, and there is no better time to call it a day. In the meantime, thanks to everyone who subscribed, and the team here would never ask anyone to do so. If you like the channel, you would also know where to find it. Once again, we sincerely hope you have enjoyed what we covered today, and look forward to seeing you again soon. God bless.